This is the Resonant Identity, a podcast about personal growth, identity, and transformation. And I am your host, Terrence Waters. If this show resonates with you, I invite you to share it with those that you care about and resonate with. And I also invite you to follow the show anywhere you find your podcasts, like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Spreaker, while also considering leaving a review and feedback so that we can improve future episodes for you. And a quick note before we begin, AI did help me generate this episode, and we personally reviewed and verified every single part of it. And at Fluxline, we believe in responsible, transparent AI usage and take full accountability for everything that we publish. You can learn more about our AI transparency policy at fluxline.pro/legal and click on the option that says responsible AI usage. And the Resonant Identity is an educational and reflective framework and is not a clinical service. If you're navigating significant emotional distress or mental health concerns, please seek support from a qualified professional. And for today's topic, now that we have the legal stuff out of the way, it will be the window of choice, helping us understand what choice means and agency as we look to make decisions aligned with our true and chosen identity. The sources for this episode come from my forthcoming framework and book, The Resonance Core Framework, from Chapter 4, The Window of Choice, Chapter 8, which talks about interpretive hygiene, information about values and virtues from Chapter 5, and information that you will find in psychological references, including the triad, Aristotle, information about emotional clarity, emotional intelligence, regulation and suppression, and all those other topics, which you can find in the show notes. Now, everything that we've explored thus far, the body signals, our emotional resonance, identity alignment, identity coherence, the vast unknown of our brains, the subconscious mind and all of its workings, and how all of we do to align all of that, right? What you've probably been listening to those episodes and recognizing we've been saying the same themes over and over again, right? So you're hearing information about somatic cues, how to align yourself, how to ground yourself, interoception, co-regulation, things like that bring you back to the present moment so that you can make informed decisions. We've really been saying the same thing over and over and over again, while we've also been trying to give you more frame of reference and understanding each piece of that process one at a time. And so you may be asking, okay, well, this is alignment. This is how I regulate myself. And this is really what I'm supposed to do before I make a decision, but I'm actually not choosing anything at this point. And you're correct. The reason for that is because we wouldn't be able to get you to this place of agency without you first understanding what true identity alignment means. Because it's everything from understanding our current reality to the vast unknown of the narratives and the somatic cues and things that we experience, to identifying who we are, what we believe in, and who we want to become, so that we can take all of those things and route them in truth, our truth, which then helps us being able to make informed decisions about who we are and who we want to become. And the reason for that is because the Resonance Core Framework just isn't simply feeling resonance. It's not simply just experiencing a thought that says, yes, I feel aligned, or yes, I'm going to make this decision because I want to be an astronaut, or whatever, right? It's more the idea of saying this is a full body and mind experience and true understanding of ourselves and our current reality. And we never would have been able to get you to this place of agency had we not gone through the full process of how we make decisions, because much of it happens in the body without us even really knowing that it is, because our body is really the one that makes the decision for us in the beginning. But it is our choice to then say, how do we want to make that decision based on what our body and minds are trying to tell us? And that, my friends, is now how we come to what we call the window of choice. So what is exactly this window of choice? Because in order for us to being able to become who we want to become, we've said it before and in many other episodes, it requires action. It's not just simply something that is given to us on a silver platter. We cannot just simply say that we want to be a musician, and then one day, all of a sudden, that affirmation comes to us. As much as the law of attraction does have its, merits and everything else, it only gets us part way. And when people try to say that you just need to visualize and manifest what it is you really want, that is part of it, but it's in no way indicative of allowing you to being able to receive those things just simply by thinking about it, because it doesn't work that way. A lot of people will try to give you that information saying you're not manifesting hard enough. You're not visualizing it hard enough. You're not giving yourself that frame of mind. And the thing is, part of that is true. I'm not discounting what they have to say. But what I am saying is there comes a point where you have to action on it because everything that is around you, all the things that you currently have, all of the situations and experiences and so forth, those are your actual decisions. Those are the things that you have made decisions for in your life that have gotten you to where you are. Now, hold on a second, because I know that's probably going to cause some strife within some of you, especially for those of you who have experienced trauma, socioeconomic statuses, poverty, different things that way. That's not what I'm saying. Those circumstances are real. They are true experiences that we have. They're also imposed problems that we have in our society. There's no denying of that. Some people have access to more things other than others. I am definitely giving that as a point. But what I am saying is the things that we can control, which is our feelings, our emotions, how we react to things, how we respond to things, and the decisions that we make, that's all within our vicinity. We make those decisions, no one else. And not even the people that we claim to say are making those decisions for us. That's also not true. In the end, you are responsible for your own life and what happens in it, because agency and choice make that happen. And the more choices that you make aligned with your true and chosen identity will more so push you more than any way of thinking or manifestation will ever get you. Because action is what pushes things forward. It is the only way to transform. And that's hard because most people are really not accustomed to understanding the actual power that is within them in the ability for people to be able to make because choice is really the thing that we get to actually control. It's the thing that makes things happen. It's how we can make those decisions based aligned in who we are, in our resonance, our true identity. And that's what the window of choice gives us. And we're now about to explain to you, well, really, what is a window of choice? Isn't it just simply choice and agency? Because yes, it is. But that's not the entire process. And like I said, we wouldn't have been able to get you to this place if you did not understand exactly how the window of choice and agency work. Now, we've gone over this before, so I don't need to go very far in depth on these. But I do recommend, if this is the first episode you're listening to, you need to go back and listen to the very beginning, which is the Resonant Identity episode 3 in our distorted reality, which specifically talks about everything you need to know all the way up to this episode. So yes, start on episode 3 and then get all the way up to here. You need all of it before you can listen to this episode. So if you haven't done that, pause this episode. I promise you will be just fine. Start with the other ones first and then come back here. But if you have listened to those, by the way, good for you, because you've been diagnosing a lot of information right now. We're now going to talk about the window of choice, but we're now going to talk about a unified review of everything that we've actually gone over before, because that is the precursor to the window of choice, everything you have learned about so far. So let's review. We know about somatic cues and emotional cues, and we know about interoception and the window of tolerance, which is what our bodies do when they are responding to any type of stimulus. That is the threat response cycle based on what is happening around us and internally. And it can be queued up by any specific area, an idea, a thought, something happening in our lives, a deadline we have to experience, whatever the case may be. Our nervous system takes that information and starts creating somatic cues in response to it by sending signals to the body, which part of that gets sent over to our brain and is responded to in forms of emotional cues, as we already know. Those come from the vast unknown of our mind, which also then develops what we call narratives, based on what it is that we think is happening, what our brain has equated with what the situation we're occurring is. And then from there, we experience all three: somatic cues, which may be positive or negative, emotional cues, which could be light, indifferent, or shadow, and narratives, which are typically routed in distortion because they are based on our past reality. Those are the three things that happen without any input from us. These are all unconscious processes because This happens starting in the nervous system, in the body. The body is always the first gate of decision making. Always. Never the brain, never the heart, nothing else. It always is the body because the body is the piece of where everything starts. Sensations start in the body. And then from there, once we've experienced these narratives and emotional cues, that is what's called the causal reality of what's currently happening. Because all of that happens without a moment's notice. It happens in our unconscious processes, typically within seconds, not even seconds, sometimes just within milliseconds, especially if it is routed in threat or distortion or fear. What then happens is the unconscious mind and the subconscious pull from the vast unknown, which is the knowledge and information data bank of what it is we've experienced in our lives, and starts to create that narrative and story. And that's where we start to experience conscious reality. At that point, the part where the subconscious mind talks to the conscious mind and starts to develop those narratives in thoughts, in judgments, that is where the windows of choice starts. Because that is where we start to experience reality. Sometimes we experience it in cues and somatics as well. So sometimes it may not just be a thought, but in most cases, the window of choice starts when we start thinking about what's happening around us. And that is a tricky part because it happens all the time, for the most minute situations to the most vast and crazy ones that we have every single day. So windows of choice happen as soon as we become consciously aware that there is something happening within our mind and or our body. And at that point, we get into what is called the volition stage. Because the volition stage is a stage which we can control because it is part of our conscious reality, whether it is shrouded in truth or distortion. So what you've explained here is we've shown you the nervous system to the emotional system over to the narratives that we explain, now to the volition stage, which this is going to be a little bit new to you, so you'll want to pay attention to this process, okay? Because here, what happens is we start experiencing uncertainty about ourselves. We start formulating what are called judgments about the situation of what's happening around us. And those get translated in our mind into words, into judgments, thoughts, things that we want to act out from, actions if we're not careful, right? Because those situations are the pieces that we can control because we can control our thoughts. We can control how we think of something. We can control how we respond or react to something. We can control what we say, and we can control what we do. All of those things that we can control, which all of them happen in the mind, this is where we are able to make choices or not, because we have that ability to take all of those data points and information and say, what the hell am I going to do with all this? And that's the hard part. This is the most difficult part because now that you're aware that decisions happen not just simply in your mind, but also in the body before you do anything, it also adds a little bit more problem and issue because now you have to understand, well, what actually is truthful? Do I feel resonance with this? Why do I feel misalignment? Why do I feel chest tightening? Because now you understand that the window of choice is not just simply making a choice. It's taking all of those data points that you've experienced, somatic, emotional, narrative, and so on, and deciding what it is you want to do with it. That is the crazy part about the window of choice, is that small window, that small piece of time from the time you experience thoughts up until the point of you're about to make a decision or not, that's where you then need to be in control and understanding what's happening in your current and future reality in line with your current and future identity. Now, before we go to break, I do want to actually give you a personal anecdote specifically about this, how it works, how it is actually perceived in action, and what you can actually do about it. Because as chance would have it, as I'm recording this actual episode, I'm experiencing a strong window of choice in trying to understand what I'm going to do with my cat. This one's a little personal, and I do not wish to make this on damper on what it is we're trying to talk about today, only just to give you a full window and understanding of how the entire process works. So when I say personal anecdote, I'm saying this is from my personal life, and it literally is raw information. This is my reality right now. And this is how you experience the window of choice in relation to different things. You're just now going to be shown an example of it. So what's been happening is that my cat, he experiences immunocompromisation because of a condition that is specific to him. He has issues with his eyes. He has trouble breathing sometimes. He has issues where he's not able to fight off disease or so forth on his own. And it's also contagious to other cats. So he has been an indoor cat for the whole time that I've had him. I adopted him during the pandemic. It was a point of time where I needed companionship because I was living alone. And he's been a wonderful pet, an absolute adorable, sweet man. I will definitely post a picture of him on my website. Because this week, I have now had to face the fact that because he is immunocompromised, there was a period of shortness in his lifetime, in his lifespan, where I did not know when that would occur, but I did know that there would come a time where I would have to make a very difficult decision, which was, how am I going to relieve him of his suffering? That moment has started to come by this week. His breathing problems have gotten worse. They've gotten to the point where he is unable to eat. He is unable to actually drink water. He has had very difficult time drinking just simple milk or antibiotics that we've been trying to give him. And the situation is that if we do not get him to a licensed professional, we would then have to go through additional things, some advanced techniques, which because I'm unemployed, I cannot afford. Things like CT scans, radiation therapy, things like that, just to be able to give him the ability to living where he is. Right. These somatic and emotional cues have been running rampant for me every single day. I have been having trouble really reconciling with the fact that I may have to let my cat go. It's been difficult. It's been frustrating. And I really was faced with that literally today, trying to understand how am I going to be able to handle myself as I really wrangle with this true but inevitable choice that I have to make. So what's been happening is on the somatic side, I've been feeling chest tightening, gut wrenching. I've been experiencing tunnel vision. As you can imagine, my emotions are feeling grief, sorrow, sadness, frustration, anger, even just because of the things I'm experiencing. And the narratives that have come into my mind because of this, because I am a person who values life, I'm also a person who values ensuring people have a good quality of life. I now have two conflicting views in my narratives, which is I want to see my cat have a very full living life, but I also want to make sure he has a good quality of life, which would mean that if I'm sending him to radiation for a year and a half, is that even a quality of life that I'm willing to actually put him through, also knowing that it's going to cause him suffering? And that inevitable decision of trying to understand what I need to do with him for his long-term care is very gut-wrenching. But the thing is, all of those decisions were made by me because of my value system, what I believe in, and what I stand for, and who I am. That's where a lot of that comes from. And part of it is also from past experience because I've had to let go of pets myself as a child. But the interesting part here, and this isn't to dwell on the logistics or the morality of euthanasia or anything like that. I apologize if that's where this is going down. What I'm trying to get to the point of is now that I understand my somatic cues, I've been able to feel my emotions and I've been able to understand my narratives. I now have that decision I need to wrench, which is understanding all of those cues and saying, what am I going to do with this? I need to sit down and actually really go through all of that data to being able to understand what is the right course of action. But we did it with my vet initial case, which was we want to at least try to give him antibiotics. I want to try to give him a good quality of life, making sure that he's able to breathe at night, giving better humidity here since I live in Salt Lake City, which has really dry air, making sure that he takes a shower with me every once in a while so he's able to clear up his nasal congestion, things like that. And hoping for the best that when we do these processes, he's actually able to recover and feel better. But what's interesting about this process is that the body is the one that is actually responding to this one because my somatic and emotional cues are already prepping me up for what may potentially be an inevitability of having to let my cat go. That is a tricky part because this in no way came from my brain. It was my somatic cues already reading the room, already seeing what potentially could be happening. And then my narratives, which my mind is now taking the logical side, is now starting to go through and try to prime me so that it softens the blow if or when that end course does have to happen. This is the window of choice in action. In a more extreme case, I will admit, and I'm sorry to bring the mood down. I promise you, I'm doing okay. It is a hard thing to face, but I did feel like I wanted to bring it in here just to show you this is really how the window of choice process works, is understanding your somatic and emotional cues with what your body is telling you, and then listening and understanding your thoughts and your emotions to really being able to say, what is the source of everything that's happening here? Because then, as we'll go through after the break, you'll then start to understand what it means to respond appropriately according to your values, your virtue systems, and what it is that you stand for in alignment with who you are. This is the Resonant Identity with your host, Terrence Waters. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Resonant Identity with your host, Terrence Waters, and thank you for joining us and coming back. Now, I apologize. I kind of left you a little bit on a cliffhanger there. I do want to reassure all of you that I'm feeling okay, feeling pretty grounded about everything, and we're just going to hope for the best when it relates to my pet. As things happen, I just want to let people know, this is life and I'm doing okay. But this is the great part about it. We're all human and we experience these issues. And part of having a podcast is showing the human side of things, right? So definitely keep up with me. Don't worry about me. We're going to continue doing this together because this is what I'm actually here for. I really do want to show you the vastness and beauty of what it is that I'm building with this framework because it's going to help you in so many different ways. Now, what we're going to be talking about are some brand new topics that we have not discussed before. Information that actually now aligns with the window of choice past when we experience our cues and our narratives from that causal reality. So the first topic we're going to be talking about today with this window of choice area is emotional intelligence. And this is the skill that takes and actually what's called widens our window of choice. Because when we talk about the window of choice, we talk about it in terms of a widened or collapsed view. And we'll explain what that means here in just a second. But for now, if you picture like for this example with what I talked about before, you can hear the emotion and the somatic, collapse that's currently happening right now. And also probably the whirlwind of thoughts that are going through my mind regarding my past issue. In that moment, though, that's where you could either experience one of two things, which is either a collapsed window of choice or an expanded window of choice. Because either way, we cannot control the outcome of what happens with our thoughts, narratives, or cues. That's why emotions and somatic cues are valid because they come from our body's personal experience. And then the mind just happens to slap on some thought processes on top of that. So either way, whether we are in a window of choice that is widened or collapsed is up to us, actually, because either way, we're going to experience these problems. The whirlwind of thoughts, the craziness that's happening in our minds, the emotions, all of those different things. And it's up to us to make sure that we choose the right actions so that way we do the right things to have a widened window of choice. So what do I mean by those two things? Simply put, a widened window of choice allows us to experience resonance, allows us to experience grounding, understanding of what is happening around us in terms of our presence and our somatic discipline with what's currently happening here around us and in the situations we are in. When we are in a widened window of choice, our cues naturally calm down. We experience those narratives in terms of actual judgment that makes sense, that follows the triad of experience, the logos, the pathos, and the ethos that we mentioned before. We are able to think clearly. We're able to experience things as data points, as curiosity, in wondering what it is that we should be doing next in terms of a logical and grounded stance. And a collapsed view is the exact opposite, which a collapsed view is we are letting our emotions and our cues run rampant. We're simply allowing them to dictate how we're making decisions. We're listening to our narratives on a constant, what we call judgment loop, which is going over and over and over again, all of those things and thoughts that convince us that we are X, Y, or Z, which are usually shrouded in distortion. And in those situations, when we make decisions from that place, we're making decisions usually in line with our past reality, which then eventually, as we've talked about before, leads down the path towards identity erosion, because of our biases, the ways that our minds reaffirm our a distortion, the way that we calm down as we root ourselves in our identity through those distorted views, and so on. And the key to it all, to ensuring that we have a widened window of choice, because that is our goal, the more that we have a widened window of choice, we are able to make better decisions, comes down to our level of what's called emotional intelligence, or EQ. Because EQ is the skill, the specific skill that we can train ourselves in to widen our window of choice, so that we become more cognizant of decisions that otherwise we wouldn't have been aware of before, because we're data driven instead of emotionally driven. Not to say that emotions are not valid, it's simply to more say we need also the intuition and the data from our actual calming of our cues to being able to make informed decisions with who we are and what we stand for. And so what we do is we use EQ to help us with emotional clarity, because what it does is it helps us go through the resonance test of understanding and interpretive hygiene to look at the situation and our emotions to understand what they are, not assigning meaning, not assigning information or shrouded in distortion of what they might mean. Instead, we're just naming them out of what they are and the actual meaning we're giving them. So, for example, in my case, because I'm experiencing grief and sadness, I'm experiencing this, of course, because of an event that's a little traumatic and not the best thing to admit, right? But at the same time, that's all it is. It is a data point, as we've mentioned many times before. And I can assign that as a shadow cue because, yes, it does collapse me a little bit, but it in no way is an indicative of who I am. It's just simply my body's response to a traumatic event that I may or may not have to experience. The somatic cues are the exact same way. We look at them in terms of the same light and different or shadow cues, depending on if we feel resonance or dissonance, like we've talked about. And the narratives are the same thing, because then when we write those things out through the resonance test, we're then able to look at and say where those thoughts come from. We're able to explain, well, what is this thought? What is the narrative that I'm being told? What is its hidden truth? And so on. All of this is part of interpretive hygiene. But the more that we practice it, what this does is it innately increases our EQ, because emotional intelligence at its core is how we're able to regulate ourselves, able to take ourselves from our cues and not suppress them, but simply look at them from a data-driven decision-making lens, which is understanding that we are experiencing emotion, not turning them off, not hiding them, not wallowing in them, not any of that, acknowledging that they are there. Because emotions are just that. We're supposed to experience emotions because that's part of our human experience. We shouldn't be dissuading them. We shouldn't be lashing out at people. They're just emotions because those usually come from our past reality. And most of the time from the vast unknown of experiences that are matched to the wrong situation. And so if we take our EQ skill and improve it through interpretive hygiene and data-driven decision making, we're then able to do what's called responsive decision making rather than reactionary decision making. And here's the difference between the two. When you want to react to something, it's easy to do because emotional reactivity feels good. You want to get out that emotion when you're making a decision just because you want it off your chest, especially if you feel like someone else caused them, which in most cases they don't, by the way. They're usually your own internal problems you need to fix. But that aside, we'll go over that later. What I'm more talking about is that when you are reactive in your decisions, you instantly want to take that emotion and project it out. You want to yell and scream at that person who's making you angry when they're not making you angry, by the way, just for the record. Yes, just trust me on that one. They're not making you angry. It's a problem within yourself you need to resolve. But the case is reactions feel good because we react our problems and project them onto the source of our problems. In this case, our thoughts, the person we feel, the person around us, whatever. But the problem with that is, and we should all know this, reactivity doesn't do anyone any good because all it does is it simply escalates the situation worse and worse and worse because we're making decisions based on emotional reactivity that may feel right in the moment and may even be justified by our narratives. But the truth is, most of the time, emotions only tell part of the story. They don't completely account for everything that is happening around us, which is what we call nuance. Because reactivity usually is rooted in black and white thinking or overgeneralization of an experience based on our past distortion or past reality. And when we experience that, we feel good about it because we see this feels right. Because you know what? These narratives are telling me that I'm right. And now it's telling me that you are wrong. And that is what's called the fundamental attribution error, which is one of our biases, our confirmation bias, our cognitive dissonance, all of those fun things that our brain likes to do, as we've talked about in the prior narrative discussions, how it loves to shroud itself and prove that it is right, because our egos do not like to be proven wrong. Ego hates being proven wrong, and it will do everything in its power to self-preserve who you are and what it thinks it is. So even if you are making wrong decisions, even if you are pushing yourself in a wrong way, it will cement that view if we do not check ourselves. This is why reactivity is not a good way to make decisions in our lives, because it doesn't have the full picture of nuance. And this is where nuance comes into play. We haven't really talked about it before, but I want to touch on it here before we go a little bit further into responsivity, because every single situation that we experience has some form of nuance to it, which means there's additional context to it that explains a little bit more about what is actually happening in the true reality. So, for example, if you see a woman going through and shoplifting, maybe like some bread or some produce or something like that, we can objectively say, yes, that person is stealing and actually is a criminal. But that also doesn't necessarily mean 100% that that person's a criminal in the black and white sense. Why not? Because nuance actually adds a little bit more to the story that makes you go, wait a minute, what is this actually doing here? Because that person, this woman, has 6 kids at home and needed to be able to steal something because they have no money just to ensure that their kids were able to eat for that day because they've been starving for a week. Now, it also makes you kind of look at it and say, wait a minute. Yeah, that person is definitely doing something criminally wrong, but does that necessarily mean that they are a criminal? And that's where we call it shades of gray, because nothing is ever 100% black and nothing is ever 100% white. Nuance always gives us, in some way, shape, or form, shades of gray. Now, again, I'm not discounting things like criminality or breaking laws or, anything like that, nor am I advocating for them. Please don't do that. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is every single situation has nuance attached to it in some way, shape, or form. There's always underlying truth or data that usually you don't know about, that if you did know, would change the way that you perceive something or make a decision. That's where data-driven decision-making comes from, because we do not want to think in overgeneralized terms, thinking that our emotions are right and they are wrong. We do not want to think in the us versus them mentality. That is not good for our abilities to being able to make decisions. Instead, we want our decisions to be placed in nuance, in data, in clarity, in understanding and curiosity, because we want to understand, wait a minute, what is actually happening around us? And that's where responsivity comes into play when it comes to EQ. Because responsivity, when we reach the volition stage of our decision making, which is we're now starting to experience our cues consciously, that is where we are cued to say stop and pause for just a moment, because you may experience resonance, dissonance, issues with regarding misalignment, narratives that are looping, all of these different things. But all of them, and that's every single one of those things that I've mentioned, are in no way indicative of who you are. Period. They aren't. They are simply data points. Just things that your body or your mind or external situations are occurring that are making you think or feel a certain way. Now, I'm saying this a little bit slower because I'm trying to get you to actually see it from a little bit of a different lens, especially if you experience cues that might make you feel hurtful, traumatized, angered. You experience the same type of narratives about yourself. You may argue it to the point in saying, yeah, that is exactly who I am. No, you're not. I'm here to tell you 100%, you are not your thoughts, your cues, your narratives, ever. Because what does make you who you are? Your judgments, the things you say, the way you act, the identity that you decide to align with, your future identity, and the way that you make decisions. That is who you are. Not your cues, not your narratives, not your emotions, none of that. Yes, they are part of you, but they are not you. They are just simply data points. And this is the joy and the beauty of the resonant identity and the resonance core framework. Because as soon as you start understanding more and more and more, reaffirming to yourself that you are not your cues, your emotions are not indicative of who you are, your thoughts are not indicative of who you are, how you think is not you. The more that you accept that aspect of yourself, you can become free of all of that. All of it, because they are data points. That's all they are. All of it. It's the beauty and joy of the resident identity. Because then what you can do, and this is where the freeing part comes into play, you can choose through emotional intelligence and grounding to respond appropriately based on all of those data points that you are being given. Because you don't want to discount them. You don't want to suppress them. You would always are told this, that you shouldn't suppress your emotions. You should not suppress your thoughts. You should embrace them, accept them for what they are. Don't believe them. Don't dwell on them. Just simply acceptance. I am experiencing chest tightening. I am experiencing anxiety. I am experiencing anger rather than I am angry. I am anxious. No, you're not. You are experiencing anxiousness. That is just an emotional state. You are not anxious. You are experiencing anxiousness. See the difference? Because then when you can free yourself from that idea that I am unlovable and instead reframe it as I'm noticing that I'm having trouble receiving love, but I'm working on myself by ensuring I put myself more out there. You've taken your narrative and reframed it in who you are. And again, that monk in the monastery who's recording the vast unknown takes that information and writes it down as your truth. That is how you free yourself from your cues. You recognize that your cues are not you. They are just simply what your body and mind are doing. And so with that, I'm now going to go back to responsivity because I did go a little bit on a tangent there, but there was a very specific reason why. Because this is one of the most powerful things that you can ever do by listening to this part, because it has freed me from my anxiousness in recognizing I get anxious all the damn time and it sucks and I hate it. But the fact is, I'm not anxious. I'm Terrence. I just experience anxiousness from time to time. That's all it is. And then you can use that data to help free yourself. And that's where responsivity comes into play. Because emotional intelligence, the more that we practice it, we then start to notice all of these things that are happening within our cues. And we look at it and we say, wait a minute, why am I experiencing anxiousness? Why is my mind racing? Wait a minute, what are all of these thoughts that I'm experiencing? Why might I be experiencing these thoughts? What's happening in my somatic cues? And again, you do this within the safety of your boundaries, right? You don't want to do this when you're in such a level of distress that you just cannot function. If that's the case, please stop. Please ensure that your safety is there. That's always important first. But the more that you practice it, you will start to be able to notice in yourself that all of those things are just simply emotions. They're just simply thoughts. So that way you can take that third person worldview, the person above circling, looking at your bubbles of all those emotions and narratives, and start to really wonder what they are. Experience them, but don't dwell on them. And from there, using interpretive hygiene and data-driven decision-making, trying to see if they actually make sense. Because is anxiousness actually needed here? Are these thoughts reminiscent of the actual experience that I'm experiencing? And if no, then you can actually look at it and say, this is part of my past reality, and say it out loud, especially if you're by yourself. If you need to discount yourself or remove yourself from a situation, please do so. But that allows you the ability to look at it and say, oh no, these are echoes. This is just past stuff. This is not reminiscent of who I am, because this is who I am. I'm a person that actually is lovable, and here is why. I offer this, and this. And someone will find these things very attractive so I can find love. Or I am not a failure. What happened was I got a C plus on my test. And this grief and this sadness and this fear are just echoes from my past experience of life, but they're in no way reminiscent of this. So next time I will do better at studying and ensuring that I get a B plus out of this course so I can still pass. What I have done there in those two examples is I've taken emotional intelligence and decided to respond to it from a data-driven decision-making lens, looking at the data and understanding what it means, or even if anything, not, if I need to align with it or not, if the resonance is there, why it's there, making sure that I have full alignment in the decisions that I make. This is what emotional intelligence gives us. It gives us that window and it widens our window of choice because instead we just take a little bit of time to pause everything while still acknowledging that we're experiencing all those things so that we can do critical thinking, understanding what specifically is happening within us and around us so we make the right call and make the right decision. And what is the right decision? That's where identity alignment comes into play, which is going to be the next piece we go over. Because identity alignment, which I also call identity coherence over time, is the long-term anchor. So, the resonant identity, the resonant core framework, these are frameworks that focus on one thing, you. You as the center of everything that happens in your life. You, because you are the one that is the orchestrator of what happens in your life, the choices that you make, the experiences that happen in your life, and who you choose to be, who you want to become, and what you stand for, and why. That is identity. You. And the person who defines that, which we did this in one of our very first episodes in Inner Alignment, is you. You define who you were, who you are, and who you are about to become, because that is your guiding compass. You, not your religion, not your politics, not your family, not your friends, not your spouse, not your kids, none of it. They may influence part of who you are, but they are not you. You get to define who you are, why you are who you are, who you want to become, and what you stand for. And the thing is, you can root it a little bit in externalities, things that you choose, which we'll get into like value systems and guardrails in future episodes. But the fact of the matter is, that's their view of who you are, not you. You can adopt some of their ideologies, absolutely. Because if they're aligned and they make sense of who you are, absolutely that should be who you are, right? But that's not everything. What is it that you want to accomplish? What are the things that you want your life to become? What are some things that you want to improve or goals that you want to set to become and transform into who you want to be? Those things can only be defined by one person, you, not me even. And that's hard because you may not even realize 100% who you are. I'm hoping you've gone through our 7-day challenges to being able to understand all this. If you haven't, especially this one, you do need to do this. Stop the episode and go right back to episode 3, in our case, episode 1, which is Inner Alignment. Go through the 7-day challenge. You can find it on Flexline's website because this is now what will be your compass in helping you understand and decide who you are and what decisions you need to make in accordance with identity alignment. Because when you experience those situations in life where you're asked to make a decision, when you need to know what you need to actually decide, identity is your actual compass. Because if you have yourself defined of who you are, why you are who you are, who you are becoming, and what you stand for in your value virtue system, which we'll get to soon, those choices are already defined for you. Because what you're looking for is one simple thing to being able to tell you if you are identity aligned or not. Resonance. Resonance is at the heart of the resonant identity and the resonance core framework. That's why it's called the resonant identity. Now, we already did talk about how resonance can be shrouded in distortion. So we also need to make sure that we're still using data-driven decision-making to validate our resonance. But the more that you start practicing decisions and who you are, that resonance and dissonant change becomes eminent, becomes much more pointed, because you start understanding what the differences are between the two, and really if they are aligned or not, and why. because you'll start to experience some of the same somatic cues, the emotional cues, the identity aligned narratives, the resonant feels, and also the emotional intelligence and responsivity that make it all happen as a reality. Because that window of choice will instantly become widened to where data driven decision making will actually be a lot easier, especially the more that you practice it. And identity acts as your compass. Because if you are aligned, you will naturally experience resonance in that decision. That's what it is. And the exact opposite. You will experience dissonance the more that you start understanding who you are and who you stand for. Because your dissonance will become much more marked because your past experience will automatically show friction in who you are and what you are becoming. In other words, when you practice identity alignment and identity aligned actions through di- through data driven decision making, it will become much more easier for your nervous system and your mind to recognize what actually is resonance and what actually is dissonance and why. Because some of those cues will start showing up involving dissonance. You will experience those chest tightening, those narratives that really try to tell you you are this other person when you're not. And you know that you're another different person. So you almost don't even have to put too much effort into it the more that you practice it. Because you then start recognizing your patterns. You start recognizing where you falter. What happens when you start experiencing a window of choice that's collapsed? Those same narratives, those same processes that just don't make sense. Because identity alignment, the more that you practice it, the easier it becomes. Because you're then making decisions aligned with who you have decided and defined who you are and who you want to become, which is the easiest part about it. Because once you define who you are, once you are aligned in that decision, and it's rooted in truth, identity alignment becomes the principle centered life of how you make decisions. And it is the compass by how of which you do so. And in the end, what then happens is you experience what's called identity integrity and identity coherence. Because identity coherence is the second most important root of the resonant identity, which means you are making decisions, consistent decisions, aligned with your true identity. And the more decisions that you align with your identity, you show the people of yourself and other people who you are because those decisions align with that person. In the world and society, you may know this as authenticity. And yes, that's definitely a big part of it. But the best part that I can implore on you is that identity coherence happens through repeatable, measurable actions that are aligned with who you are. And the more you practice it, you then communicate out to yourself and others who you are and who you want to become because you are making decisions based in authenticity from who you have defined, no one else. And yes, you can still adopt those things like politics, religion, socioeconomic issues, how you view your values, things that come externally, whatever, cultural references. You could identify with minority groups. You may identify as just a standard person. Great. Whatever makes sense to you is how you define your identity. And identity alignment are making those decisions in line with that person that you yourself have defined. You're listening to The Resonant Identity with your host, Terrence Waters. We'll be right back. This is The Resonant Identity with your host, Terrence Waters. And thanks for joining me and welcome back. So now what we're going to do is we're now going to apply a little bit of a process, which what we've been doing up to this point known as the resonance test. Because the question I'm sure that's already boiling in your mind right now is, okay, I've defined my identity and I'm ready to get started. And I understand what resonance and alignment look like. How do I know what decision I need to make? What decision do I need to make? What does it even look like when I'm making identity aligned decisions? Well, my friend, you're now about to know the process through one step at a time, because we're going to take the resonance test, which we talked about in the prior episode, and we're now going to expand it a little bit with the knowledge that we have about the window of choice, emotional intelligence, and identity alignment and coherence. So hold on to your shorts for just a little bit because you did this in your prior 7-day challenge, and I hope you still have that reference. because I now want to expand it to incorporate these new topics that we talked about today. So we already know that when we are wanting to make a decision or feeling like we need to do something, it always starts with the volition stage, where we experience the somatic, emotional, or narratives, or all three, or some of them, in our conscious experience. And we start to then generate judgments or thoughts or words to try to explain what it is we're experiencing from our bodies. So, what we do first in the resonance test is we then also assert to see if we're experiencing supposed resonance or dissonance. And we know those to be misalignment or alignment of our cues and narratives. But when we experience either or, we first pause. Either way, because we may think that we're aligned in something, but it could be shrouded in distortion. And we may think that we're misaligned in something and should avoid it, when actually it is aligned with our true and current identity, the things that we talked about before. So we have to pause the record. All of the emotions, all of the somatic cues, all of the narratives, the thoughts, the things that we want to do, we need to center ourselves. This is the step right before we do the window of choice, because we first need to pause. We've entered the window of choice in the threshold, which is another term for it, but we need to stop ourselves. And that's our grounding techniques: interoception, box breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, taking a walk, postures, whatever it is you need to do to bring yourself back to the present moment, while also not discounting your cues. We're accepting that everything is there, but we're also allowing ourselves to say, yep, I notice this is all here. And then we invoke emotional intelligence aspects. So we've talked about scanning the body, naming the emotion, and checking the narratives, but all of that can be wrapped into now what we call emotional intelligence and choosing to be responsive. So when we say to scan the body, we notice any and all somatic cues that we're experiencing. We feel but don't dwell on all the emotions that we have. And we start to write down the narratives of what it is that our mind is telling us. And of course, we go through our practice of labeling them as light cues, which are resonant, indifferent cues, which have no charge, or shadow cues, which are dissonant experiences. All of that is part of emotional intelligence. That is our way of just pausing the script a little bit, defining everything that's happening, and then looking into what we need to do next. Because in order for us to now understand the window of choice, we need to ask ourselves, does this feel like me? This is the interpretive hygiene triad process, because we look at it in one of three lenses, actually all three. The logos, which is, does this make sense? Am I actually able to explain this to someone coherently? The pathos, which is, how does this feel in the body? Do I feel aligned with it? Is it aligning with my intuitive sense of what's happening? And does this feel like me? Is this aligned with who I am? Is this aligned with what I stand for? Is it within my actual boundaries of who it is that I am? And we take those three pieces of information off of all the cues to help us align with the actual decision that we're about to make based on whatever it is we're doing. And based on all that information, we validate our resonance and or dissonance and understand how it relates to the decision that we want to make or not. And so now from here, we're going to add one final step after all of that interpretive hygiene, noticing the body, and so on. We're going to now make a choice within the window of choice. And here are your options. If you feel resonant and comfortable in this decision you're about to make, and it checks all of the triad's interpretive hygiene's boxes, it makes sense, you are resonant with it, it makes intuitive sense, and it's aligned with you, you make the choice. I mean, that's really what it is. You make the choice because you are 100% aligned in that choice, and you have been able to prove it through data-driven decision making. Not just simply that you're doing a hunch, not simply that you're making an intuitive or impulse buy. You're making a choice to do something aligned with who you are and what you stand for. The opposite, though, is also true, but it gets a little more nuanced on this one. If you feel then dissonance or misalignment, and then you start noticing that you're experiencing kind of that disconnect a little bit, something feels off, or something just doesn't feel truly aligned with who you are, you need to look at the decision itself in understanding, is that decision aligned with who you are? Because if you're experiencing shadow cues, but you are also experiencing the triad interpretive hygiene's truth in who you are, that is an aligned choice. because your past experience is telling you no, but that's not who you are. Who you are is what you have chosen, and your narratives and your information may reflect that. And so you should still make that choice. But if you've then determined that there's still that little bit of misunderstanding, or you need more information to being able to actually make a firm choice, you go back and you actually do the same interpretive hygiene steps again. You start looking at, well, wait a minute, why is this? Why am I experiencing dissonance? What is wrong here? Why am I experiencing something wrong? Where does something just feel misaligned? And I wouldn't even say right or wrong, because I would more just simply say truth, distortion, alignment, misalignment, and so on. Because it's really hard to say what is right or wrong. Again, that's black and white thinking. It's way too easy to drop into that. So don't do that. So if you feel like that you can iron it out a little bit, and then you might be able to make a resonant decision, then do so. But the opposite piece, and this is the bigger kicker, if you then realize that this is just not going to be received, that there just doesn't seem a way out of this, that for whatever reason, this is fully misaligned, and there's not a way that you're going to be able to correct it or realign it in actual resonance, don't make the decision. You don't have to feel bad about not making it. You don't have to think that you're a bad person for deciding not to. Instead, you are actually making a data-driven a data-driven decision by choosing not to make the decision. That's also a choice of agency, because you then prove to yourself that this decision has in no way, shape, or form any alignment. And so if it doesn't, why would you decide it? Why would you act on that? The truth is you wouldn't, because it then degrades who you are, because you're making decision outside of who you are and what you stand for. So now what you'll need to understand here is that this happens instantaneously. And usually it's not quite this simple. And we know this, right? Because most of our decisions happen with other people around us. We're kind of put in a heat in the moment situation. We don't really have the ability of making those decisions that quickly. We have to really ascertain what's happening around us. And if this is brand new, it's also going to be overwhelming, right? Because you then have to be able to say, how do I practice this? Wait a minute. I have to now do all of these things, trying to make sure that I'm going to be making a resonant decision that is aligned with who I am. And now I need to be aware of my feelings, my thoughts, yeah. The answer is yes. Yes, you do. Because if you're making decisions based on a past version of yourself and you're not aware of it, you're going to incur identity erosion. And the exact opposite is true as well. If you're making decisions that you see are aligned, but you're not aware that they're actually causing you identity alignment, you're going to still be stuck in the same situation because you don't realize that you're making empowering decisions that are transforming you. So you may make a decision that is aligned, but if you're not even aware of what it's doing, then it's just not going to help you in any way. You're just simply going to make a decision that is who you are. And yes, it may help you or make you appear in some way a good person or whatever, but it doesn't transform you because you don't feel aligned with it. You don't feel resonant with it. That's the difference between the decisions that you're making now and the decisions that you will now start to make with this new process. Because you can make decisions about who you are all day long. That doesn't matter. That just simply shows coherence. And yes, that actually is important because then you're communicating to the world who you are. But if you want to transform into the person of who you want to become, you also need to make decisions that embody those as well. So for example, if you're going to go for a new business, you can't just simply sit around and hope that it actually shows up on your lap. You have to look at those situations and open yourself up to new discoveries to make decisions in line with who you want to become. And those are critical thinking decisions. Those are things you have to be aware of that actually involve resonance, not just simply making a decision of who you are. So the big key between just a standard decision with who you are or who you're becoming and a transformative decision about who you are or who you are becoming is resonance. Because resonance rewrites the script. Resonance, what it does is it tells your nervous system in the vast unknown of your mind that this is who you are and who you want to become. It rewrites the script. It takes those data centers and formats those drives of the information that it thinks you are and replaces it with this over time. Not immediately, it takes some time, but it does eventually start to rewrite the script. This is the difference between making decisions and making transformative decisions. Because if you want to transform into who you want to become, you have to redefine yourself. You have to make decisions based on who you want to become, not who you are. Not just who you are, by the way. That's the tricky part here. So now you understand that you can make decisions all day long, but you need to practice the resonance test. Practice it every single day as much as you can. You're not going to get it right the first couple of times. You're going to screw it up. I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to screw it up multiple times. This is in no way indicative of who you are or your character or anything like that. How we learn to do things is by doing. That is how everything works. Any skill, critical thinking, playing a musical instrument, doing anything in this world, you have to practice it. The resonant identity and the resonance core framework, like any other skill, must be practiced one day at a time with small micro wins. Doing the process, seeing where you've made mistakes, and improving yourself. So know that you're given unlimited time to make this happen. You're under no time frame to say this needs to happen by tomorrow. All you're doing is you're using today to look at the decisions of what it is you need to make and say, how can I make sure that these are resonant decisions in line with who I am and who I want to become so I can transform myself? That is the goal of the resonant identity, the main goal. Transforming into who you want to become to elicit change. It's the beauty and wondrous, awesome thing about the identity coherence life of the resonant identity. So before we go to our last break, I do want to give you just a small preview of what's going to be happening in our next episodes, because now the talk is going to be shifting about, well, how do I define my identity? How do I define who I am or what I stand for? And we'll start to be going into understanding various parts of the resonance core framework that explain to us how to actually define all of that. Because we're then going to go into a value virtue system, which explains to us why we believe what we do and how we can embody our values. And then we're going to define what are called drives, which are actual small microtransactions of what we do to embody our value virtue system. And then from there, we also need to show ourselves that there's a limit to what it is that we can do as people. And so we're then going to talk about what are called guardrails, how we can establish boundaries, how can we ensure that we are acting within the actual work that we can do while also preserving our energy, while preserving ourselves and doing the things that matter. And then from there, it's moving forward into momentum, continually making those decisions that ensure that we're embodying who we are and what we stand for. So now we're going to be taking and reframing not just the window of choice, understanding that little part we can control, but now giving ourselves examples and defining for ourselves all of those things that help us get to that point. And that will be over the next several episodes. You're listening to The Resonant Identity with your host, Terrence Waters. We will be right back. You're listening to The Resonant Identity with your host, Terrence Waters. Thanks for coming back. And finally, to end this episode, we're now going to go back into our 7-day challenge, which is widening the window, which in this case, again, because we mentioned that we must action in order to be able to transform into who we want to become and enhance our current and true identity, we have to action on it. All these things that we're talking about mean nothing to you unless you action. And that is what this process does. So when we do 7-day challenges, we incorporate these ideas and these experiences and these tools from the resonant core framework and practice them to ensure that we're making data-driven decision-making and decisions based in who we are. Now, again, you'll find this in the show notes and also on Fluxline's website under TRI. But here, I'm just going to go over it real quickly. So first off, what I want you to do on day 1 is I want you to first recognize when the moment of choice and that threshold occurs. So remember that our body and our mind are going to do whatever they're going to do, and we cannot control what happens in that case. We'll experience emotions, thoughts, and somatic cues in response to what the nervous system thinks it wants to respond to. And our brain then tries to make sense of it all. But the thing is, the volition stage is the exact moment where the moment of choice starts. When we start experiencing consciously any one of those 3 things, or all of them, which in most cases it's all 3, especially if it's a threat response issue. You'll experience chest tightening. You may experience shorter breaths. You may experience fear, trauma. You may also start looping through all of these random narratives. That specific moment that you recognize that it is happening within you, that is the moment of choice and where the resonant test starts. Because at that point, that's when you're asked to just simply slow down and stop and pause with what's happening, not discounting everything, not pushing it away or whatever else. It's simply taking that information and saying, this is the moment of choice. I'm ready to start. Because we need to practice this as much as possible so that way we can know to be more responsive in our decisions rather than reactive. And then what I want you to do is then understand the somatic and emotional and narratives that you're experiencing in that moment on day 2. So that could be from the moment you experienced the day before or one that experienced that same day on day 2. And I want you just to write down and label your somatic, your emotional, and narrative cues in light, indifferent, or shadow cues, depending on what it is you experienced. Again, you're seeing things from a third person point of view. You're not trying to rewrite the script. You're just simply going through and naming things. We're also not trying to say what could they mean just yet. Because then what I want you to do is with that same list on day 3, I want you to take it and try to write out the vast unknown. What are the stories that you're currently seeing based on all of these things, and what could they mean or represent? What specifically does it actually bring in you that causes you distortion? Or what actually in it brings you resonance? Why does it bring you resonance? What are you seeing in those cues that start to show you a little bit of the patterning of what's happening in your subconscious? Because we can't access the subconscious script itself, but it can give us clues based especially on what our narratives and our emotions are trying to tell us. And so that's what this practice does, is that it takes apart some of that meaning that we think has on it and instead look at it from a data lens so that we can start to see, oh, okay, this is actually dissonant because this, and this. And these are resonant because of this in my current reality and my current identity. And then what I want you to do is I want you to bring it into emotional intelligence, which is trying to make meaning of everything instead of trying to be reactive. So when you then experience the vast unknown and you start noticing the threshold of the moment of choice, what I want you to do is to practice the pause process. Instead of choosing reactivity, I want you to do what you can do in practicing data-driven responsivity, slowing down the script, pausing what's happening within you, and choosing instead to look at your cues before you make a decision. And I want you to do this actually over days 5 and days 6, because what this does is it trains your mind to understand what emotional intelligence is. It asks you to look at it and say, this is the way that I wish to respond to this situation and why. Because what it does is you're actually retraining your nervous system in your mind to actually work through interoception, understanding this is how I want to respond to these situations instead of trying to be so reactive all the time. And it actually works over time because then your nervous system starts to work within the appropriate window of tolerance rather than a constant react process. So from days 5 and 6, when you notice the window of choice starting to occur from that threshold, I want you to instead incorporate into your mind processes and your grounding. I choose responsivity and my intelligence. I choose grounding. I choose EQ. So that way it just brings you down. You can then start the resonant test like you normally do if you feel comfortable, or if you're not quite comfortable with it yet, as long as you have that ability to distinguish and slow down the roll, that's what we're asking for you from days 5 and 6. And then finally, day 7, we want you to then build the architecture. So now that you know some of those things that are causing your past distortion and your present and true reality based on the decisions that you're about to make, I want you to define and redefine your identity. So this is who you are and what you stand for, and also who you were. Because what we're going to be doing in the next several episodes is we're going to be taking that identity that you define, and we're going to then be bringing it full circle by now defining what you stand for and why. Because, yeah, you could say that you're this person all day long, but you also need to stand up for yourself. And that's where this framing comes into play. You do need to know who you are first, and you do need to know who you want to become. because in order for you to be able to transform, you also have to stand up for yourself and what it is you believe in. And that's the tricky part here. So in order for us to do that, you need a clearly defined identity in order to be able to make that happen.